What does baseball have to do with spiritual formation? It is opening day for baseball today. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get my good friend, J.R. Briggs, on to talk about spiritual formation in baseball. I just reached out to him like yesterday. I was like, hey, we got to do this podcast episode for opening day. He said, okay. I didn't even like write down his bio to introduce him because I usually introduce my guests because I'm such a professional, but not today. So, JR, could you just introduce yourself briefly, who you are and what you do? And then we're going to be off and running and talking about the top 10 reasons why baseball is like the journey of spiritual formation. Who
Yeah,
are you?
yeah, man. Thanks, Geoff. Good to be with you all. And so I am a husband. I'm a father. I'm a church planter, and now I am the founding director of an organization called Kairos Partnerships that helps leaders through coaching, consulting, spiritual formation. And I'm also a baseball fan, which is why when you reached out, Geoff, I'm like, heck yes, we have to do this. This would be great. So looking forward to this conversation.
So, for a little bit of context of our kind of immediate situation is JR, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, was in Chicago when I was in Chicago doing, I think, a Genesis church planting training. And I spoke into it just a little bit, and I think Sid was helping out with it a little bit more. And then I don't even know what happened. You're like, hey, Geoff, we're going to Wrigley tonight. I was like, okay. And then you had tickets to the bleachers before
Yes.
they're renovated. They were a little less, they're
Yeah.
pretty swanky right now. Like the post 2014, 2015. This is before the Cubs won the World Series.
hmm
And you were like, let's go. And I'd never been to the bleachers. We'd always sat up in the stands, usually the
Yeah.
cheap seats in the upper deck. So what was your first experience there in the
Yes.
bleachers?
Well,
The
I and I
bleacher bums.
yes, I'm not a Cubs fan, but I'm a baseball fan, and I've loved my time going to Wrigley. And like you, I've just sat in the main stands, but I've always wanted to sit in the bleachers. And people said it's a completely different experience. Technically, even though I was helping out with that church planter training with you all, I was technically on sabbatical, and so part of the emphasis of my sabbatical was to go to several major and minor league baseball stadiums and games with my family or by myself. And so if I'm in a new city, I'm going, hey, let's hit a place. Let's go to a game. You're a big baseball fan. You're a Cubs fan. And I said, let's do it. You hooked us up with some great parking, a friend of a friend at some church, I remember.
Oh, that's
And
right. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then we were in left center field. And I just remember thinking, this is an amazing way to spend a sabbatical night with a good dude and great food and great drink and great game in a great stadium. It was amazing. And if I remember right, Geoff, they hadn't won the World Series, but I think that either the night before our night or the next night, they had clinched a playoff spot. I think this was the year before they won the World
Oh,
Series.
so
So
this would have been
the
15 then.
energy was just so palpable because it was the first time the Cubs had clinched in a long time. So what do you
Yeah, and it was
remember from that time?
well, I remember, so we had been, and this actually does fit into our spiritual formation kind of church thing because I'd been to Wrigley and other baseball stadiums like in the, where you pay and you have your seat, it's an assigned seat and you kind of shuffle past some people and they're all there for their thing. And then you're there for your thing and you have the three people you came with and you kind of ignore people except for when you pass beer or hot dogs down. Right. But that's kind of the typical experience in the regular seating. But in the bleachers, it's kind of like there's this like total change. And tell me what you experience. Like, oh, we're all family. We're all in this together.
Yes.
There's not really assigned seating. You kind of just find, and it's just a bench. It's like old school, like benches, like at a high school game or something like that, the
Yes.
stadium seating. And you just show up and you're kind of squeaking by and you're squeezing butts in. Um, and so and then you're kind of taunting the other team's outfielders,
Yeah,
and
the
then you're
left
also
fielder we
cheering.
were
And then it's kind of like you kind of are taunting the others. So we were in left field and the right field, and you're chanting from right field to left field. So it was this totally different
Yeah.
crowd communal experience, which I was not expecting.
Yeah, and I'm not a Cubs fan, but that night you better believe I was a Cubs fan and felt fully embraced into the Cubs family. It was so fun. There's no way I was going to root against the Cubs. If I remember right, I think it was the Brewers. And just it was so, yeah, family was the word that comes to mind when I think about that experience. Home runs, extra base hits, you're high-fiving, you're hugging strangers around you. It's a
Mhm.
different experience. I now understood when people said, oh, the bleachers are like watching it's a different Cubs experience. didn't really get it until that night. And I'm not sure I want to sit in the regular stands anymore. It was so much fun.
I have recently, but yeah, we got to go back. And this will go into some of our 10 reasons why baseball connects with spiritual formation. But there is, just for those of you who don't know, at Wrigley Field, there's a tradition where if the opposing team hits a home run into the bleachers, you throw the ball back. That is not a souvenir you keep. You throw it back. And so that was kind of fun where you're learning
Yes.
kind of the
And
rules of
remember the
this.
cup snake? The cup snake was super long, and we're adding
Oh
to the
yeah. So
cups
you get
going
these
up.
giant beer cups, and then like when you're done, you put it in a giant snake. It's
Hundreds
crazy.
and hundreds of cups, and you're just helping people add to it and move it around. It looks like a giant snake.
So this isn't a top 10, but this is like 10 reasons. I think we have 10. I might have miscounted. So we're going to do like 5, and then I want to hear one of your favorite baseball memories. Mine is kind of embarrassing. It's not
Okay.
actually a favorite. It's just one of the most impactful. Um, and then we'll finish off the last. So we kind of hinted on it. I'm going to steal the first one. Why is baseball so pertinent to spiritual formation? Because the whole point of the game is you're trying to get back home. You start at home, you try to do some things, and you have to run around the bases. You go through the course of your life, but you're trying to get back home, and you have a family cheering you on and helping you out as best as they can. But it's the same spiritual formation, discipleship, life with God is that we're trying to come back home. We're entering into a new family.
Mm.
Father God is calling us home. Brother Jesus is cheering us on, and the Spirit is empowering us as we go. And so that's why baseball is the greatest example of sports for our spiritual formation. What do you think?
Yes, actually, I wrote about this in one of my books in the
I
Sacred
know you.
Overlap
I
about
probably just
joy.
stole that from you when we were
No,
sitting in the stands.
no, it's one of the things I love about it is I heard about a guy, I don't even remember his name, and I think I quoted him in the book, about he actually collected walk-off home runs and pictures of them. Because when you look at joy of all these people who are waiting at home for their teammate to circle third and head for home, and some of those pictures, you could just do a Google search for walk-off home runs, and the joy of these grown-ups acting like little kids, like they're back in Little League, and just sometimes it's like almost brings me to tears of like,
Oh, for
that's
sure.
the Father when we come back home. Like there's joy in heaven,
Yeah.
when even one sinner repents, as Jesus says, there's joy in heaven. And that idea of waiting around home plate and dousing them with food or dumping, pieces of gum or dumping, seeds on their head or whatever it might be, like that is so redemptive. So I'm so glad you started with that one. I totally agree.
Yeah, so it's like the prodigal son coming back home, and there's great
Yes.
celebration. There's a feast, there's a festival. You start singing, there's music, there's anthems. So for those of you who don't know, who don't follow baseball, a walk-off home run effectively ends the game, and the team that hit it wins. And the runner has to go around the bases, but since the game is effectively over, the whole team runs out and waits for them at home plate for them to return home to end the game with a victory. Okay, so not as happy, but it's still very connected. And you have a lot to say about this, I know, is that baseball actually has built into it a lot of failure.
Mhm.
Now, why does failure, what does that have to do with baseball, but also spiritual formation?
Yeah, the idea of grace, right? Like we
And you wrote a
come
book about this, so, you could promote the book. That's okay.
well, but just we've all experienced failure, but like what does it mean to live a life where we actually learn from our failures and there's redemption and grace in the midst of it? And so, I mean, just you and I think we even talked about it that night in the bleachers, Geoff, but the idea that like if you fail only 7 out of 10 times at bat, you do that over your career, you're in the Hall of Fame. You have a 300 career batting average. And
Mhm.
only 1 or 2 people in history have averaged only failing 6 out of 10 times on average throughout their career. That's crazy. Any other field, business, education, whatever, like there's no way anybody would do that. But that's the idea of failure. And how do we learn from failure? And when a player's going over 30 and trying to get out of a slump, like what do you do in that? How do you encourage your teammates, right? And so this idea of like we are failures, right? That's the idea of confession and repentance, is we start by admitting we are failures and that we
Mm.
can't save ourselves and there's something greater than us that will save us. And so that idea of not flaunting our failure, not falling into despair, but of realizing our admission of our failure through confession and repentance is what ushers us in to experience that grace and mercy of Jesus that's available to us. So, what
Mm.
about you? How have you seen this idea of failure and
Well,
spiritual formation?
you just like now that we're like talking about it, so a 70% failure rate is considered successful. I was just thinking through Ed Tronick and some other the baby watcher kind of neuroscientists, and they talk about attunement and relational attunement, and they say that we're misattuned with people 70% of the time.
Fascinating.
And
Wow.
that is not a problem. What is a problem is when you don't have the repairs. And so there,
Mm,
that we're a rupture sounds very extreme, right? But we're misattuned. And
mm.
then the whole process of a good relationship is being able to come back on the same page and become attuned. And so yeah, we're out of tune with people, a lot of the majority of the time. And then the Christian life, I think, in the spiritual practices, forget like that you said, confession, forgiveness, repentance, but also, seeking love and good works and things is that repair process.
Yeah, that's
And
good.
so we're
That's
just
good.
continually working on that. And you can't take that failure to heart. You just have to keep going. You just have to keep showing up.
Yeah.
Um, these are not in order. If I spent more time, I would have built a thematic kind of thing because I love those logical linear things. But another one, okay, this was me growing up because I played baseball, but it was for me, it was so boring. It was so boring. I didn't. My parents made me play baseball in the spring just to get me out of the house and make me run around.
Is that
I was
right?
much, I was much more of the fall soccer. Like we played
Mhm.
in California, it was soccer in the fall, baseball in the spring. But I did not like baseball. It was so boring. So much standing around, unless you're the pitcher, I guess. And I hated being the catcher. But it was so boring, and people say that too a lot. Like, oh, if it's so boring. What would you say to those who say that baseball is boring, and how does it connect to our spiritual life?
Yeah, I actually jolt them a little bit when they say it's so boring. They're expecting me to say, "No, it's not. It's so exciting." I go, "You're right. It is." And they're like, "What?
Yeah.
Why do you like it?" And I say, "Because so much of life, even the Christian life, is not a highlight reel of fireworks all the time. It's instead life, and faithful life in the kingdom. It's just faithfully living into the everyday, ordinary elements of life and inviting Jesus into those. And so, is there a walk-off home run? Yes. Are there double plays and, great hits? Of course. But that's just a fraction of the time that's there. So much of it is showing up, being a good teammate, cheering your teammates on. And I think so much of life is that of just like, I'm going to faithfully fulfill my responsibilities and my role in what I'm doing. Most of my life and your life, Geoff, and everyone else listening, is not a highlight reel. It is
Hmm.
just faithfully learning to plod through and trust Jesus in the everyday, ordinary moments of our lives. And so, yeah, to me, that is what makes it somewhat boring. And I put that in air quotes, boring. But also, before we were recording, before we press record, I mentioned like during sabbatical, that was one of the main reasons because I'm a type A driven person. I need governors put on me to make sure that I don't exceed certain speeds. And baseball makes me go, I'm not in a rush. Just
Hmm.
enter into the flow of this game. And that quote unquote boringness actually helps slow me down. And it's good for my soul, right? Like the speed of
Yeah.
godliness is slow. And so if I can just enter into that slow pace in a world that's so frenetic and fast, I think baseball, they're trying to speed it up with the pitch clock, as we know. But it actually is one of the few spaces in our lives where it actually slowing down in the sport can be a superpower or can be so rare to rise above the noise of everything being faster, better, louder, busier. And so that's why I like it. And that's what my wife says. She's like, I like going to games. I don't like watching them on TV because they're too boring on TV. And I say, okay. But on a good Saturday afternoon, it's just good to
Oh, for
preferably in
sure.
person, but even listening to it on the radio slows me down when I'm in the car.
Oh yeah, for sure. Many years I listened to Ron Santo and Pat Hughes for the
That's right.
Cubs
Yeah.
on the WGN network. I forget what the radio station was back then. Um, but yeah, just the monotony of it, um, and a sense of routine. We're gonna get into the routines
Mm.
as one of our other points, but um, I think it's kind of this, especially if you play it. But even when you're kind of watching, is there's this combination of it being slow and boring, but you also have to pay attention. Uh,
Yes.
and of course, for legal reasons, they extended the nets on first base and second and third base for foul balls and things like that. But but also for the players, like nothing's happening and anything could happen and you need to be
Yes.
ready. And so there is this
Good.
combination of attentiveness, because the
I
ancient
like that.
spiritual
Yeah.
traditions do talk about watchfulness and
Yeah.
attentiveness as like kind of these key things.
Yeah, and even though
Uh,
it's quote unquote boring and slow, but at the same time, yeah, like the spirit can do anything at any time. And so that idea of watchfulness and attentiveness, I'm so glad you brought that in. It has to be both at the same time. That's really good because one errant foul
you
ball,
might
if
get
I'm not looking, I might get clunked in the head, So
that's right.
that's a great point, Jeff.
Or that broken bat spinning off into the
Yeah.
stands, man. You got to be ready. So the last one before we have our seventh inning stretch is the spring of new life. So every spring baseball starts over. Every team has a winning chance. All your rookies and your call ups, and you're giving someone a chance. Everyone is healthy usually. Um, that there's this. It's like the only sport where there's this combination of the season starting, at least in the northern hemisphere, and we're getting out of the cold, we're getting out of the snow, we're getting out of the rain. Spring has sprung. New life is here. So it's kind of that resurrection moment that I know, baseball's on the television, you know, I also have to think about yard work, which is not always my favorite, but it's the new life. I love it.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I love that we practice Lent and then Easter, Resurrection Sunday, sort of as the weather's turning in the Northern Hemisphere. And then the other side, too, the World Series ends right when it's getting colder, right? So it's a little bit of a sort of
Yep.
rising up and then and sort of ending at the same time. And so, yeah, what is it? Hope springs eternal. Everyone thinks their team during spring training is going to win the World Series. And that is a palpable hope around every single club, Major League Baseball club. They feel that hope. This could be our year. And I think
Our
there's
year
something powerful to
lasted
that.
last year for you Cubs fans. You know this. Our hope lasted about 3 innings until Justin Steele, our ace pitcher, on a routine kind of ground ball over to first base, like pulled it, I forget, a hammy or rolled an ankle. And he was out for half the season. It was like so heartbreaking. That was such a bummer. Okay. So that's the first top five. We're going to interrupt this. What is one of your most memorable or crazy baseball in a stadium experiences?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a big Phillies fan because I'm here in the Philadelphia area, and I don't even you may not know this, Jeff, but I was asked to actually be the Phillies chaplain a few years ago, and just out of schedule, had to turn it down. But talk about spiritual formation and
What?
baseball matching together. That would
You
have
even
been
have Kyle Schwarber over there. Come on.
that would have been really
God.
fun. That would have been really fun. Um, but I actually, it's a long story, but I had a friend call me when the Phillies were in the World Series in 2022 against the Astros. And I love going to Citizens Bank Park, the home of the Philadelphia Phillies. And he said, "Hey, I have a free World Series ticket. If you'd like to sit next to me, I would love to have you." And I said, "Let me pray about that." Yes, yes, of course. And so we did it, and it was great. I mean, amazing to be there for a World Series. I mean, it's so amped up. The only problem was, Jeff, that was the day that the Astros in Game 4 threw a combined no-hitter against the Phillies in the World Series. So other than the starting lineups, there literally was no other reason for us to use our rally towels that were given out to us to every fan when
Oh,
they walked
no.
in. It was brutal. Like, so grateful to go to the World Series. That is a hot ticket in Philly. Everybody wants it. Very expensive. I got it free from a friend and nothing to cheer for. So that
Oh,
is
man.
that is my historic, meaningful, memorable, but devastating World Series moment. How about you? You have one?
So I was young. First time I went to a baseball game, the San Francisco Giants in the old Candlestick Park where the 49ers and the Giants used to both play at way back in the day. And I was there. This was Ken Griffey Jr.'s rookie year.
Wow.
I had the new upper deck baseball line. Like it was this new line. I had his rookie card like in that
Wow.
plastic sleeve. I was like
Yeah.
a giant fan. He was playing with the
I can
Mariners.
picture that card.
He was there. I don't even know how this like got scheduled. I'm just like, you're a little kid, you just get shuffled around, right? We're at this baseball game. So, okay, I'm trying not to share too much for especially the female listeners, but I'm a guy. I've peed in urinals as a kid before, but you go to a baseball stadium. I'm a little kid, I had to pee. I've never peed in basically a giant trough. It's an open
Yeah.
trough.
The old
Like
trough.
all the guys
Yeah.
know this giant,
Yes.
and I got this little
Stage fright.
too much. Yes,
You got
that is what
stage fright.
happened. That
Yeah.
is exactly what happened. So I go in, I go out. Nothing has changed. I waited out 2 more innings and I am dying.
Yeah.
I was like, I guess I'm just gonna have to figure this out. So I go back in. I finally, I'm able to work things out. The whole stadium erupts.
Oh, no.
Ken Griffey Jr. hit a home run, and I was in the bathroom for the second time, and I missed the home run,
That
and I
is
had
a
his
great
rookie
story.
card. It was so horrible.
That is a great
Okay.
story.
I don't know how to make that into a spiritual formation lesson, but that was heartbreaking. Okay. So back to the top 10 reasons. Number 6, teamwork. How
Mm.
does teamwork exemplify our life in spiritual formation from
Yeah,
baseball?
it's fascinating because baseball, you know, it's not like basketball where like everybody is on the field at the same time doing their role. Like, yes, of course, when you're on defense, when you're out in the field, but when you're a batter, you're the only one in the batter's box. So you're doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for your team together. But out in the field, if one person makes an error, it lets down everybody else. And in baseball,
Mhm.
each one of those errors adds up. It's so important. It's not like in the NBA with 130 points scored each night. It could be 1-0, and that error makes a difference. But the idea of teammates, how often do you hear a post-game interview where they say, man, my teammates picked me up, or when I failed, they came and they delivered even though I wasn't doing so well, or the encouragement that my hitting coach came over and whispered something to me. So much of it is mental, right? What 90% of it is mental, the other half is physical, said Yogi Berra. And I just think that idea of like we've got to be relief pitchers. How many pitchers go the full 9 innings anymore? Hardly ever, like they used to do in
Right.
the 60s and the 70s. And so this idea of like we need everybody involved. One of my favorite stories with the Phillies this past year is actually not our catcher, although JT Realmuto is my favorite Phillies player. It's the backup catcher. And Stubbs is his name. And everybody loves Stubby. And the reason being is he hardly plays, but he is the heart and soul of the team. And so Stubbs, anytime he would cheer for his teammates, or he was in charge of the clubhouse music mix, and he was like the
Mm.
DJ. And everyone said like Stubbs is our favorite guy on the team. And so that to me is just an example of how important Garrett Stubbs was to the team. And
Mhm.
we need everybody involved. Everybody involved. Teammates, you've got to be able to work with your teammates, or baseball does not work.
Yeah, for sure. And then it's similar to that is routines.
Mhm.
Number 7 is the routines of baseball, and it kind of goes back to it being boring, and the failure is that, and the mindfulness is that I think the mindset of a baseball player, just
Mm.
because there is so much downtime,
Mhm.
that and people getting called off the bench and designated hitters, and people are relief pitchers. Like you just have to be ready, but you're also waiting. And then the routines is kind of, I think, what bridges that. The readiness and the waiting is your
Yeah.
routines, the preparation routines, the routines in between innings, taking some batting practice, doing your outfield, infield practice, even doing your bunting routines, and reviewing the signs and things. Like always, it's all the stuff that you do in advance. And I know all sports kind of have that for sure. But it does seem that baseball has this special kind of place, and you could even call them rituals, right?
Mhm.
A lot of rituals. And there's a lot of superstition. I know other sports have superstition, but I think baseball players
Yeah.
have quite a bit of superstition that's related to their routines. If I'm in a slump, I got to change something. If I'm, on a hot streak, then we got to keep everything the same. And I think there is something a little bit about that for our spiritual life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to me, when I think about this idea of routines and rhythms, some players like to get there really early, and they say, I'm going to jog at, 1:55 for a 4 o'clock game, and then I come back and do 10 minutes of this. And I'm stretching and doing this, taking 200 cuts in the batting cage before we get started. To me, those are spiritual disciplines and spiritual practices that keep us grounded, right?
Mhm.
And they may not do it for spiritual reasons, but I think about the idea of routines like almost like a rule of life. They wouldn't call it that, but baseball players have a rule of life: what they will eat, when they will stretch, when they will even talk to their teammates, long toss, short toss, warm up in the bullpen before a game if you're a starting pitcher. So that idea of spiritual disciplines or spiritual habits, a rule of life, is so important to our formation. We don't just show
Hmm.
up and just say like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. There are just healthy, grounding spiritual disciplines to engage in that it doesn't earn us grace, which is an oxymoron. It actually opens our lives up to be used more by God and to experience his grace in our lives that much more. And
Yeah.
so, right, the gospel's not against work, it's against earning, as Dallas Willard says. And so, but we put ourselves in a position by engaging in spiritual disciplines or rule of life. So that's what
And
I
it's such a
love
long
those.
season.
Yeah.
It's such a long season that you need those routines that even when you're feeling out of it, your whole team's on a losing streak, or you are, like those routines kind of just help bridge that, just the length of the season.
Mhm.
Whereas other sports, it's pretty different. Um, so, okay, so now we're going to kind of get a little bit more meta.
Okay.
But tell us about the traditions of baseball.
Yeah.
How is that like spiritual formation for our number 8 reason?
Yeah. So the idea of traditions, I, you know, some baseball stadiums have been called cathedrals, which I find it very interesting. In fact, there's a book called Green Cathedrals. On Twitter, there was a Twitter handle that I followed for a while called, or X or whatever it's called now, Cathedrals of Baseball. And it just featured old photographs of Major League Baseball stadiums. But so there's traditions of uniform and logo and even the unwritten rules of baseball and how they exist. I just noticed that Comerica Park, where the Tigers play, used to have a strip since its beginning from the pitcher's mound to home plate, like a dirt strip. And it was used
Uh-huh.
to do that in old stadiums. It's the only one now. This year, they just decided to make it all grass. There's no strip anymore.
What? They
Yes,
got rid of it?
exactly. And everyone's up in arms. Why? Because tradition matters in baseball. And that's why people love A Field of Dreams and The Natural and all these things, because tradition, we think about, oh, my grandfather took me to a game when I was a kid, or you were a kid at Candlestick Park, like, or throwing the ball, playing catch in the backyard with dad. Like, these are
Yeah.
just the tradition of that, going, man, now I bring my kids to games, and maybe one day I will bring my grandkids to games. Those sorts of things is why tradition, I think, of all of the sports, tradition matters the most with baseball, because it so grounds us in relationship and nostalgia of previous generations and connects us to future generations. And I think the
Mhm.
same thing with the church. If we think that Christianity was invented in 1983 because we sing songs or do things that have only been quote unquote invented or done since 1983, we miss out on the rich traditions of the shoulders of men and women who we stand upon, who have gone before us, and great church fathers and mothers, and learning from the desert fathers and the reformers enriches
Mhm.
our faith even more. Just like we love reading about baseball history, helps us love baseball present and baseball future even more.
And it doesn't mean that there's not open to innovation. There's like a big
Yeah,
movement to statistics and, launch angle a couple years ago and, strikeouts, on base percentage. There's a whole Moneyball.
even robo
So there
umps
is,
that they're
there is
testing out, right? I mean,
the
that's
what?
weird. Robo umps, where
Oh,
they're
yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, trying to figure out, like, you can now challenge if it's a ball or a strike now, and you see it on
Yeah,
the video board. Like, that is
which is nuts.
crazy to baseball purists.
But there is a sense though, because in a lot of sports, especially football, especially basketball, is when you compare like the great teams of today to like 20 and then certainly 30 years ago, everyone's like, the game is totally different now. The game, like basketball, the 3-point shooting, the role of the big man, like all this, it's totally different now. MJ, LeBron, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then the role of the offenses in football and the quarterback and all this stuff. But baseball's not like, it hasn't changed that much. Like you can, like what, 100 years ago, they lowered the mound and then certainly, 60 years ago, they integrated. So
Yeah,
they had the Negro leagues and the white leagues, so people are like, was Babe Ruth really, playing
yeah,
against the best people? That's valid. But besides
yeah.
that,
Yeah.
you're like, well, what? Now we have a pitch clock.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
hasn't
We
changed
banned the
that much.
shift, right? But,
Yeah.
like, there's
Which
not
I'm a big
many.
fan of. I'm
Yes,
a big fan of
and there's
banning the
some
shift. So,
tweaks, but you're right. It has remained largely the same, just like Christianity, right? Like,
yeah.
it's a virgin birth. It's the good news of Jesus, the Son of God, who came down in our form, who died for us, not because of our works. I mean, Christianity remains the same throughout history, but wrestling with the innovation piece is really important too, because some churches are like cutting edge, 1634, so this idea of like how do we meet people where they're at in the culture that they're in while still having the beautiful tradition and rich history of our faith. And
Yeah.
baseball, Rob Manfred, the commissioner, is trying to find where does that come into play of valuing history and tradition with innovation and change to meet the culture where it's at with baseball. Same thing with the church. We're wrestling with how do we do that faithfully?
Well, this goes into number 9, then I think I got a little out of order, but the innovation usually comes through the minor leagues. And so
Yes.
baseball has a very robust, leveled minor league system where they do
Mhm.
try out some of these rule changes. They do try out some of these things. But how does the idea of a minor league kind of fit into our own spiritual lives?
Yeah, this may be my favorite of all of the ones that we've listed, is this idea of the minor leagues, or what's called the farm system, right? Of developing, could be single A, double A, triple A, and then the majors, or even short season single A, and then single A, double A, triple A. The idea of discipleship and the idea of we are developed. You aren't just drafted and then you end up on a Major League Baseball roster and you thrive. Because so much of it is failure, it's learning to develop over time, develop our mechanics, develop our batting stance, developing our speed and strength, angles, rules, mental preparation. And I think that's so important as we think about Second Timothy 2:2. And the things you've heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will teach others. Most minor league coaches are former players. Most minor league managers are former players. And this idea of passing on the tradition and doing it young, and not just even developing your minor leagues and your farm system, but on top of that, they're trying to do a lot of youth development, right? A lot of inner city work. Major League Baseball is pumping a lot of money into Little League now. Little League World Series
Mhm.
is so fun to watch, but that development, baseball's too hard. You can't just decide at 18 years old you're going to start playing baseball and be really good and play in the majors when you're 20. It's got to be this development that happens over time. So this idea of discipleship and mentoring and building into the generation behind us, if you
Mhm.
stop doing that in baseball, stop developing the next generation of players, the game falls apart. Just like Christianity, we are one generation away from if we just refuse to disciple people entirely, Christianity buckles. It depends upon discipleship in that. So, and I actually, as much as I love watching the Phillies and going to major league parks, we actually love going to Reading Fightin' Phils, which Reading, Pennsylvania is about an hour away from us. And we love going. It's double A. They've been there since the 60s. Mike Schmidt came up there when he was a teenager. And it is so fun to this day to do that. We love going. They're hustling. They're trying their best. They want to make it to the next level. They may not be able to field great or, have the most impressive arms yet, but we love going. And part of the reason we love minor league baseball is the developmental aspect of it. And Christianity should always be in the developmental side of discipling people, especially
Yeah.
the next generation.
We got several kids in our youth group who, in the summers, they work at the Whitecaps Stadium here in
Nice.
Grand Rapids, which is
The West
affiliated with
Michigan
the Detroit
Whitecaps. Yeah.
Tigers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
baby.
and the thing too is back to failure, and how do you deal with failure and learn and grow through failure? Is baseball is one of the only sports where you can make it to the major leagues and then go back to the minor leagues,
Yeah.
and even the best players did that multiple times. They go in for a stint for part of a season, and then they go back down to the minors because they have to work on something. Whereas in other sports, you make it to the highest level, and then you just stay there until you retire or you get, right. So there's this up and down, forward
Mm.
and back, and I think that's something for all of us to embrace. Like our life with Christ is not just 100% movement forward all the
Mm.
time. Like we have lapses, We have to go back and relearn things again. We find out that we have weaknesses that we weren't aware of that we need to shore up, and that's
Even
okay.
rehab stints, right? You get injured, you go down
Oh
to
yeah, you get
AAA to
injured.
get
Yep.
your cuts and your confidence back before you come up to the major league club again.
That's yeah. That could be a whole nother sub
Yeah,
point.
it could. Extra
Is the
innings.
rehabbing.
And then
Is that purgatory? Extra innings as purgatory. And we have the phantom base runner on second as a rule change. All right. Just to wrap this up then, and this kind of brings us back to point number one is that we're all trying to get back home. Is you had an
Mm.
experience just of going out to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Could you tell us just about where that is physically and how you got there and just kind of how it kind of pulled some of these things together?
Yeah, Baseball Hall of Fame is in Cooperstown, New York, which is in the middle of nowhere. And from us, it's about, I think, about a 5-hour drive. So I drove my boys up and we went. The museum is great. The Hall of Fame is just so special if you're a baseball fan. But one of the things we found is that you get off the interstate and then it's about an hour drive on winding, slow roads that you pass farms and you can't go fast. And it's not in the hustle and bustle. And in some ways, it really slowed us down to sort of get in the rhythm of what baseball is about. And this idea of like, you can't get there quickly, and baseball is not a game. We talked about it being slow and boring. That it just kind of slowed me down to a pace to receive baseball as the pace of baseball is meant to be. If you are a baseball fan, do whatever you can to get out to Cooperstown. It's great. We have yet to go out during a Hall of Fame induction weekend. But if you go, it's a lot of traffic, but it's free. You can go to those. It's just in a field. Anybody can show up to the Baseball Hall of Fame induction weekend. But the Baseball Hall of Fame, not only is it cool, the actual museum and Hall of Fame that you pay admission to, but the whole town of Cooperstown, New York is amazing. Every single restaurant, every shop. I mean, they have like just a shop for minor league baseball caps. They have just one that's baseball bats. You can get your name inscribed on a bat, a Louisville Slugger bat. And so if you ever get a chance to go, it is a baseball fan's Disney World. It is so much
Mm,
fun. Have you ever been there, Jeff?
I have not. No,
You
I
got to
have
go,
not.
man. You got to go.
Well, it kind of reminds me of, it's just a normal everyday place. You have to just drive through a normal everyday places to get there. And it reminds me of the great cloud of witnesses that we're supposed to keep
Huh.
before us, that there are people who have come before us.
Yeah, good.
They've done great things, but they've also kind of suffered through all the things that we mentioned here. And I think it kind of is, it's telling the story, not of just baseball, but we spiritually need to be good at telling our stories spiritually to our children and
Mm.
grandchildren, but
Mhm.
also asking other people's stories, our elders, those who've gone before us, and listening to how is it that God's worked in your life? How did you discern these things in your life? Why did you make these decisions to do this and do that? And how did you get through that tough time when you were in that slump, otherwise known as, you lost a child unexpectedly, or, you lost your job and had to relocate? Like, how did you the routines, and just listening to
Yeah.
our elders and getting those stories. And so that's what the Hall of Fame. Do we have a spiritual Hall of Fame that we're regularly visiting? Because that'll be good for our souls.
Right, like Hebrews 11 is referred to, right, as the Faith Hall of Fame. And so it is so cool. It was so fun. My kids were little. They're older now. They're teenagers. But when they were little, walking through and be like, hey, let me tell you about this guy, Mike Schmidt. Let me tell you how great this pitcher was. He was Joe DiMaggio. Let me tell you about how great Joe DiMaggio was, And it was just, Bob Gibson. This guy was an amazing pitcher. And it was so fun just telling those stories and seeing my sons fall in love with baseball was really an unbelievable experience as a dad and as a baseball fan. So I'm so
Oh,
glad you
that's
picked up
great.
on that. But that idea of the Hall of Fame is just, yeah, it's the heart of.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's God's game, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close.
It's the only game where you're trying to get home. So that's why baseball is a perfect metaphor for spiritual
Mm.
formation. Well, thanks for responding to my text yesterday. I'm glad we could work this out. We actually had a lot more to say than I thought. I thought we'd just go on for maybe 15, 20 minutes. Now we're up to 40 minutes. But thank you so much, JR.
Oh, this was so fun. What an invitation. And go Phils. Go Phils. This is our year.
Go Cubs. And if the Cubs stink, then maybe I'll root for the Giants. But thanks so much. And please, please share this around to your baseball fans and drop in the comments wherever you see this. What would you add to why baseball is the best sport for our spiritual formation. Thanks again, JR.
Thanks for having me.